Terror attacks in Germany and Turkey. Is terrorism now the new normal for Europe and the region? Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. Europe is again reeling from yet another bloody terror attack. This time the target was Germany. 12 people were killed and dozens more injured after a truck plowed through a crowd at a Christmas market in Berlin on Monday. The same day in Ankara, an off-duty policeman assassinated the Russian ambassador to Turkey. That country has also been hit with a series of recent terror attacks, including twin explosions in Istanbul earlier this month. And this year too, France was hit hard when 84 people were killed after a truck driven by a Tunisian national rammed into a crowd celebrating Bastille Day in Nice. Belgium was targeted too. More than 30 people died after bomb attacks in Brussels last March. Right across Europe and the region, people are wondering if terror is now becoming a normal part of their lives. We begin with CCTV correspondent Guy Henderson, who joins us from Berlin. And Guy, what's the latest on the investigation into Monday's terror attack, and what's been the reaction in Germany to the Berlin attack?
Well, police now have a new prime suspect, and they are offering more than $100,000 for any information that leads to the arrest of a 23-year-old Tunisian national called Anis Amri. Now, Anis Amri is a man who was known to German authorities before this attack, known to be connected to a large Islamist network, from what we understand. A man who was being urgently sought, according to the Interior Minister of the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, where he had been granted a temporary permit to remain in this country. But it seems as though authorities knew he was a risk, knew even or suspected that he might be planning what they called a seditious act, and they wanted to deport him, but were struggling to do so because they could not verify his identity and his identity documents. That is likely to stoke debate and anger, and has indeed already done so in the hours since that announcement. On the other side of where I'm standing now, a few hundred meters down the road, we've had quite lively protests. On one side, several hundred people saying that Germany should continue to welcome refugees to this country. On the other, a small group of counter-protesters. What you're looking at now is a far more somber tone, just a few hundred meters away from where that protest was taking place. A sign of the respect that have been paid by hundreds, thousands of people who have made their way through here, through the day, an attempt to return things to normal. The police have now brought the barriers down, but still, I think this city really feeling the impact of what has happened here this week.
Guy, after major attacks this year in Nice, Brussels and now Berlin, how much concern is there across Europe about more terror attacks? And what sort of joint efforts are there to prevent this ongoing threat?
Well, I think, as you mentioned, European citizens, certainly German citizens, many of them have come to expect this kind of occasional horrible, horrendous event. And I think one of the key things that European governments, certainly the big three so-called European Union governments of France, Germany, Italy, see a key part of combating that as stepping up cooperation between each other. That's why, for example, we've seen Europol, the European Union's law enforcement agency, on the 1st of January this year, launch its counter-terrorism office in the Netherlands, but it's a very nascent effort. Sharing information and intelligence, even between close allies, is an extremely sensitive issue. Particularly those three big European governments as well have also been pushing in an even more recent effort to step up joint defence cooperation. There is a feeling amongst European governments that part of the reason that these kind of terrible events happen is that there are failed states around Europe's border, in places like Syria, in places like Libya, which allows organisations like Islamic State to spread their message of hate and inspire these kinds of attacks. So defence cooperation is also a sort of key tenet, a key message that European governments are trying to get across. But That is a very new effort because the United Kingdom had always opposed it. It, of course, is now on its way out of the European Union, and many still see that as being many years away. And finally, just to not forget that there is a very volatile political situation across Europe, several key elections taking place here over the next year or so, which could make cooperation on these kind of issues more difficult at a time when it is, or at least these governments believe that there is more need for that kind of cooperation than ever.
Okay, thanks, Guy. That's CCTV's Guy Henderson reporting from Berlin. Joining me now to discuss all of this is Ansgar Graw. He is a senior political correspondent for the German newspaper Die Welt. With us from Istanbul is Ali Cinar. He is president of the Turkish Heritage Foundation. Joining us from Paris is Joav Toker. He is a lecturer and expert on international relations and diplomacy. Also with us here in the studio is Kamran Bokhari. He is an expert on violent extremism, and he is the Director of Political Affairs at the Center for Global Policy. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Ansgar, let me start with you. The New York Times described the terror attack in Berlin as a cruel test for Germany. It went on to say that German values of tolerance, inclusion, and equality are being tested. Is German patience running out here?
We have to say it's not the very first attack or terror attack on Germany. Over the course of the last 1.5 years, there were some smaller incidents already. There was a guy from Syria who tried to plan an attack against an airport in Berlin. There was a guy with an axe and knife who stabbed down passengers in a train in Bavaria. There was another guy, a suicide attacker in Bavaria. Fortunately, he was only able to kill himself, and therefore there were some incidents, and the Germans were warned, and I think most of the Germans expected that someday something would happen, since in nearly all other European countries, Spain, United Kingdom, France, Belgium, such incidents and such terror attacks happened, and therefore when it comes, it's a bad shock and it's devastating, but I don't think it's a total game changer. But I think most people in Germany are expecting that we are beefing up, for example, our vetting system in regard to refugees and migrants. We have to beef up our security system,
right,
and that will have some impact on our asylum and migration laws.
Right. Let's go to Ali in Istanbul. And Ali, there was another terror attack in Turkey. The Russian ambassador was assassinated this week. I mean, what does it tell you when not even a diplomat in the Turkish capital is safe? And how is Turkey responding to this?
Turkey responded very quickly. Currently, a Russian investigation team just arrived to Turkey to look into the horrific case. And Turkish foreign minister met the foreign minister of Russia and the Iran foreign minister in Moscow before their discussion on Syria. So Turkey and Russia right now are collaborating on investigating this horrific attack. I mean, everybody is still in shock. How did it happen in capital of Turkey, in Ankara? And they are investigating right now. And today, Turkish officials said there is a link. The off-duty police officer was linked to with Fethullah Gülen terrorist organization, and they are looking into some evidences. And as you know, last week there were 2 more attacks in Istanbul and Kayseri. 64 security personnel and civilians were killed, mostly police officers and Turkish soldiers, and by PKK related with PYD. So Turkey is still under attack in most of the terrorist organizations. And today, recently, in past 2 hours,
right,
14 Turkish soldiers were killed in Al-Abab, Iraq, by ISIS. So Turkey is in shock right now with many terrorist attacks and trying to respond quickly.
Kamran, if we could get back to the Berlin attack for a moment. Here's a country, Germany, that's being targeted here. It's got a very liberal policy when it comes to refugees. In fact, Chancellor Angela Merkel has gone out on a political limb here, throwing the doors open to refugees. So why is Germany being targeted?
There are 2 reasons. One has to do with opportunity, that there is an infrastructure in the country that allows for such attacks. So it's not like ISIS can just pick up their bags and go and attack anywhere. They have to have people on the ground, the logistics, and the supply chain. So that's number one. Number two is that Germany is not the only country being targeted. France is being targeted as well. Belgium is being targeted. ISIS, I just published an article on this recently, that there is a strategic method to this madness, which is that they are trying to, if you will, accentuate that anti-immigrant sentiment in the country, because the more there's polarization, the more ISIS achieves its strategic objective, which is to gain more recruits and create that polarization, create a warlike situation, because ISIS sees itself as expanding under those conditions. ISIS can't topple sitting governments, but if there's a crisis between the Middle East and Europe, then that facilitates ISIS's strategic objectives.
So ISIS is looking for a strong backlash from people against Muslims in these European countries?
Absolutely, because it vindicates their narrative of that there's a war against Islam and Muslims. It gains them recruits. And so at the end of the day, these are not, if you will, random attacks. Yes, they are, if you will, there are targets of opportunity. But behind that is the strategy that we need to be able to expand. How do we expand? We create polarization, we gain new recruits, and we force Western governments to crack down harder, not on domestic populations, but also go into other areas.
Right, Joav, Toker, in Paris, listening to what Kamran is saying, yeah, is that already happening, being played out in France? You've had several attacks, terror attacks in France. You had that really tragic horror incident in Nice where more than 80 people were killed. But are we seeing now that French people are responding to this? There is something of a backlash here. There's a massive shift to the right. We could see a change in government come next year.
Yes, I would say that everything is extremely edgy around these issues and these themes and these dynamics that we are proposing in the discussion. The most important one seems to me, among other things, based on the French experience of the last 2 or 3 years, is indeed that vector, that factor of creating antagonism, which indeed is, in a rational way, the ambition of ISIL and other organizations who are trying to destabilize Western European and non-European governments. And you can see indeed some symptoms of these dangers becoming effective. I wouldn't say that this is a smashing efficiency right now. I wouldn't say that the fact that the overall electorate in France, for example, but also in many other European countries, is sort of sliding towards the right and the extreme right in some accelerated way over the last 2, 3, 4 years is necessarily linked only to the issues we are discussing, namely violence in the public sphere, migration and immigration. Just take the United States in that sense and try to interpret along these lines these last electoral year in America, which is going to end up on January 20th with a new president. So I think that the scope of why are the electorates sliding are larger, but indeed the violent scenes in the public sphere are the major events in a way, are sort of pillars over this landscape, which might explain a lot of things.
Go ahead.
I think we have to see an additional factor. I think it's for sure ISIS is trying to destabilize all those countries, but not in all those Islamic terrorist attacks that we have seen over the course of the last 1, 2, 3, 4 years. Those perpetrators were in direct contact with ISIS, or not all of those attacks were organized by ISIS. I think in some cases it were self-radicalization topics, and for example, in this case, this guy they are searching for in Germany at this moment from Tunisia. He's well known to the police as a criminal. He's an arsonist. He's a burglar. He had a bar fight. He did a lot of criminal deeds.
That's right. He is known to the police force,
we have a familiar pattern that some of those criminals they get in contact with Islamic groups, and then they are told, if you start your jihad, if you make an if you make a terror attack, and you will die during this attack, all of your sins are forgiven, and you go to paradise. And some of those criminals try this way without any. We don't know whether he had direct ties to Islamic State, but at least he had ties to Islamic groups.
There certainly is a pattern. We saw that in Brussels as well. Kamran.
So I agree with my colleague here that they're not all tied, but from ISIS's point of view, it doesn't matter. They are deliberately saying to people that you don't need to join the group. You can do it on your own. Their magazines are full of, so for example, the Beak magazine is full of ways in which an individual all by themselves can do it without any or very little, if you will, contact with the hive mind. So, but in the end, it is what ISIS wants, and it is serving their purpose. So they may not be planning it, but they are. And he's right that these are people with a criminal background. But then who better from ISIS's point of view to be a recruit than someone who can actually do violence? So if you're not someone with a violent past, it's more difficult to get you to commit a violent act, as opposed to someone who's done violence and you taint it with religion and say, hey, you're going to go to heaven.
Yeah, we hear that more and more often, that the attack was ISIS-inspired rather than them taking part in it. We are going to take a break right now. Much more on how countries from Germany to Turkey are dealing with the wave of terror attacks. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.